Montana Territory, late September 1878. The wind was already sharp with the coming winter when Xavier Ames spotted her under the cottonwood tree, shaking like a leaf with her arms wrapped tight around her middle. He pulled his horse to a stop. The woman was barefoot, mud on her hem, face pale and eyes darting like a wild thing. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and she looked so small against the wide stretch of land behind her that it made something in Xavier's chest twist hard. He dismounted slow, careful not to startle her. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice low. She flinched, curling in tighter. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Xavier unrolled the blanket from his saddle, walked forward a few steps, and held it out. "I ain't gonna hurt you, just take this." "You're freezing." The wind kicked up, rustling the yellowing leaves above them. She didn't answer, but after a long second her hand reached out. Thin fingers clutched the edge of the wool, pulling it around her shoulders with a shiver. He crouched beside her, not too close, but close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "My name's Xavier Ames," he said. "I got a small cattle spread about 3 miles west. I can take you there. You don't have to say anything yet, but you can warm up, eat something." "You're safe now," she blinked at him, lips trembling. Then finally, in a voice so soft he barely caught it, she said, "I am not from here." "I figured," he said gently. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Adaline Fair." That name settled in his mind like a stone dropped in a still creek. He nodded. "All right, Miss Fair, let's get you out of the cold." She tried to stand and stumbled. He caught her with both hands, steady and firm. "You walked a long way?" he asked. She nodded, breathing hard. "I have not slept in 2 nights. I ran." His jaw clenched, but he asked nothing else. She looked like a woman who had been running from something worse than the dark. They rode double on his horse, her small frame pressed against his chest, his coat wrapped around her. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was dipping behind the hills. He helped her down, led her inside, and got the fire going in the hearth. Adaline stood near the wall, eyes flicking around like she still expected someone to burst through the door. Xavier handed her a tin cup of warm water. "You want to tell me what happened?" She stiffened. "There were men. I was traveling with them west from St. Paul. My parents died last year. I had nowhere else to go. But the men," she swallowed hard. "They said they would take care of me. Then they sold the wagon and the horses in Miles City and left me behind." Xavier's hands curled into fists. "They left you out there," she nodded, staring into the fire now. "They took everything, said I was not worth the food." He walked into the kitchen and returned with a plate of dried meat and bread. "You are worth something here," he said quietly. "Eat." She sat and took small bites, eyes still wide with caution. But color slowly came back into her cheeks, and when she looked up at him again, something had shifted. The hard edges of fear started to soften. That night, he made up the cot for her in the corner and slept on a bedroll by the fire. She watched him closely but said nothing. In the quiet hours before dawn, he heard her whimper in her sleep. She curled up tighter on the cot, whispering something he could not understand. He got up, laid another blanket over her, and sat beside the fire, watching the flames flicker. He had prayed more in the last year than he ever had before. After his father died, after the cattle got sick, after the storms nearly ruined the land. He prayed for someone to make all the empty in his life feel less sharp. He never expected the answer to come like this. The next morning, she sat at the table, her hair braided back neatly, hands folded in her lap. "I will not stay long," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I just need a few days, then I will find work." "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you being kind to me?" He shrugged. "Because someone should be." She stared at him for a long time. Then softly, "Thank you, Xavier." He felt the way his name sounded on her lips, like something warm and close. He nodded once. "You are welcome, Adaline." Over the next few days, she helped around the cabin sweeping, cooking, even mending the tear in his shirt without being asked. She moved quiet, but he noticed how she relaxed more with each passing evening. One morning, she stood on the porch watching the hills while the sun rose. "You ever ride?" he asked, coming up beside her. She nodded. My father taught me. Before everything changed, he saddled 2 horses and helped her up. They rode to the edge of the pasture where the river cut through the land like a ribbon of silver. She smiled for the first time. Not big, not for long, but it was there. You got a good smile, he said. Adaline looked away, cheeks pink. By the end of the week, she laughed once when the barn cat jumped onto the table and knocked over a tin cup. Xavier liked the sound of it more than he could explain. That night after dinner, she stood by the fire quiet. I think I was meant to meet you, she said. He looked up from the chair. Yeah, she nodded. You are the first man who looked at me like I mattered. Xavier stood, walked toward her. You do matter, Adaline. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch like it was the first time anyone had ever touched her without taking something. I do not know what comes next, she whispered. I do, he said. You stay, we figure it out. Together. She opened her eyes, and he saw it the first flicker of trust, of hope, of something new blooming in the ashes. She reached for his hand and laced her fingers with his. And for the first time in too long, Xavier Ames felt something like peace. By the second week, the snow line had crept lower along the ridges east of the pasture, and Xavier began hauling wood in earnest. He didn't ask her to help, but Adaline followed him out to the stack behind the barn, sleeves rolled up, her hands red from the chill. She didn't speak much while they worked, but she didn't shy from the weight either, and he noticed the way she glanced at the sky measuring time the way folks who'd lived through hard winters learned to. You know weather? He asked, setting down a split log. Some, she said. My grandfather was Norwegian. He could read frost on a window like scripture. Xavier leaned on the axe handle. He teach you that? Bits, she said. He died when I was 12, but I remember. He nodded and passed her another log. She took it without flinching, even though her knuckles were raw. That night he found her seated by the hearth with a tin of liniment and his old sewing needle. Her fingers were working through a length of hide, and she didn't stop when he came in. What's that? He asked, hanging his coat. Mittens, she said. Yours are worn through. He stepped closer, watching. The stitches were small and even. You've done this before. My mother taught me to stitch leather before she let me near cloth, she said. She said mistakes in hide cost more. He sat across from her and rested his forearms on his knees. You talk about them like they're still near. They are, she said simply. The silence between them settled like snow, soft, certain, and without need for filling. He didn't ask anything more. She didn't offer. 2 mornings later, a rifle shot cracked across the stillness. Xavier was outside before the echo faded, his Winchester already in hand. Adaline stood on the porch, eyes narrowed toward the tree line. North fence, she said. He glanced at her, surprised. You sure? She pointed. There's a bluff above that draw. Sound carries different when it bounces off stone. He didn't question it. He saddled up and she handed him his gloves, the new ones, the hide still soft from her treatment. Ride careful, she said. He touched her hand lightly. I will. It turned out to be nothing more than a rancher's boy from the next valley over, tracking an injured elk too close to the property line. But when Xavier returned near sundown, tired and dust-streaked, Adaline was waiting with a basin of warm water and a folded towel. No words. Just hands steady and sure, cleansing grime from his face like she'd done it 100 times before. Your jaw's bruised, she said, brushing a thumb near his chin. Elk kicked the stirrup when I got too close, he murmured. She didn't laugh, but her mouth curved slightly. You deserved it then. He watched her quiet. You're different when you're not afraid. I'm still careful, she said. She didn't pull her hand away. I don't mind careful, he said. That night she sat beside him on the porch step, both wrapped in their own coats, firelight flickering behind the window glass. I've been thinking, she said, about where I go from here. He stared out toward the darkening hills. And I don't want to leave. He turned to look at her. Then don't. I don't expect anything, she said, voice low. I want to work. I want to stay where someone sees me. You already do, he said. I see you. She looked at him then, and the last of the guardedness in her eyes slipped. You don't ask for much. I don't want much, he said. What do you want? He reached over slow and took her hand, held it like it was something sacred. This, just this. She didn't speak, but her fingers tightened around his. The moon climbed higher and neither of them moved away. By mid-October, the creek behind the barn had begun to glaze over at the edges, thin sheets of ice catching the morning light. Adaline stood at the water's bend with a woven basket in her arms, watching the frost cling to the reeds. Xavier saw her from the fence line, her figure still and upright, like she was listening to something beneath the hush of the wind. He didn't call out, just walked toward her, boots pressing soft prints into the brittle ground. When he reached her side, she didn't look away from the water. My mother used to say the earth sleeps differently in the cold, she said. It's not dead, just breathing shallow. Xavier glanced at her, then followed her gaze downstream. You believe that? I think I want to, she said. He shifted the basket from her arms to his. It was filled with late apples, small and mottled but still good. You picked these from the tree near the east fence, she nodded. The birds left a few. He could feel the cold in her fingers even after she let go of the basket. He pulled one glove from his coat pocket and offered it. I'll keep the other, he said. She slid it on, her fingertips resting for a moment against his palm before slipping away. You don't talk much about your people. My folks didn't stay in one place long enough to leave roots, he said. My father followed work. My mother followed him. Were you close with them? He took a while to answer. I tried to be. They walked back to the cabin in quiet, the kind that didn't press down but stretched easy between them. The stove had kept the place warm, and she moved straight to the table, pulling out cloths she'd laid aside earlier. These are clean, she said. I can patch the seams on your work shirt today. He leaned against the doorframe. Adaline. What do you want this to be? Her hands paused, fingertips smoothing the fabric. I haven't figured it all the way through. I don't mean in the far-off kind of way. I mean here, us, this place. She folded the shirt slowly. I want to wake up knowing I'm not waiting to be left behind. You're not, he said. I want to know that if I plant something, it'll still be there come spring. He walked to the table and sat across from her. Then plant it here. She looked up and her eyes didn't flick away this time. You really want that? I've wanted it since I found you under that tree. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I still have pieces that feel broken. Then we take our time, he said. There's no hurry here. She reached across the table, laid her hand over his. I never thought I'd find a place where time felt like a gift. He turned his hand over slowly, palm to palm. You've got it now. That evening, she stood at the stove stirring cornmeal over low heat. The light from the lantern touched the curve of her cheek and the line of her jaw. Xavier watched her from the doorway, the scent of wood smoke and something warm filling the small space between them. I used to think survival was the only thing I'd ever manage, she said, not turning around. It's more than that now, he said. She nodded once, then set the spoon down. I've been thinking about the empty plot behind the barn. I could put in onions and carrots come thaw. You don't need to ask. I know, she said. But I wanted to. Xavier crossed the room and stood behind her, close enough to feel the heat off her back, but not touching. She turned slowly, met his eyes. I don't want to sleep on the cot anymore, she said. He touched the side of her face, his hand steady and warm. You don't have to. I want to be beside you, she said, voice low. Not just near. His forehead rested against hers, breath shared in the hush between words. Then stay with me, Adaline. She kissed him first soft and sure, and when he kissed her back, it felt like something long buried rising to meet the light. That night they lay together in his bed, her head tucked beneath his chin, her hand resting over his heart. Wind curled around the corners of the cabin, but inside everything was still. He didn't sleep right away. He watched the slow rise and fall of her breath, the way her hair spilled across the quilt, the steady weight of her hand. She was real. Here. Not something he'd dreamed up in the long stretch of lonely months. He closed his eyes and whispered a quiet thanks to the dark. Outside, the land held its breath, waiting for snow. Inside, Xavier Ames and Adaline Fair had already found their thaw. The first real snow came in the night, blanketing the hills in a hush that swallowed sound. By morning, the world outside had turned white and clean, the sky dim with heavy clouds, the trees bowed under fresh weight. Adaline stood at the window with her arms folded, watching the flakes drift slow and silent past the glass. Xavier set a kettle over the fire and rubbed his hands together. "You ever seen snow this early?" She shook her head. "Minnesota had storms, but they never came this soft." He crossed the room, leaned beside her. "It'll pile deep this year, you can feel it in the air." "I believe you," she said, her breath fogging the pain. He studied her profile, the way her eyes followed the wind beyond the cabin walls. "You still want to plant that garden come spring?" he asked. "I do." "We'll need to clear new ground," he said. "Soil behind the barn's thin, water doesn't reach well." She turned to him slowly. "You already checked last week," he said. "Didn't tell you then, figured I'd wait till you were sure." The corner of her mouth lifted. "I've been sure." Xavier opened the cellar trapdoor and pulled up a jar of preserved peaches, brushing frost from the lid. "If we ration careful, this'll last us through February." "I can stretch flour," she said. "Make broth from bones." He handed her the jar. "I know." Later that morning, she brought her stitching basket to the table, sorting through pieces of wool she'd salvaged from a box he hadn't touched in years. She laid them out in quiet rows, measuring with her eyes. Xavier glanced up from the hearth. "You making something?" "A quilt," she said. "For the bed, the one now doesn't hold warmth the same." He rose and walked over, watching her hands. "You've got a way with things that have been forgotten." She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I know what it is to be forgotten." He reached down, brushed his thumb over the back of her hand. "You're not anymore." That evening, a knock came at the door sharp, twice, then once more after a pause. Xavier opened it to find a man he recognized from the far edge of the valley, a trapper named Rosser with a horse gone lame, and a look in his eye that said trouble had been close behind. "Didn't think I'd make it this far," Rosser said, stamping snow from his boots. Xavier stepped aside. "Get in before you freeze your lungs." Adaline fetched a tin of coffee from the shelf as Rosser settled near the fire, his coat stiff with ice along the hem. "Something following you?" Xavier asked. "Maybe." Rosser glanced toward the window, then back at them. "Saw tracks near the ridgeline. Didn't look like elk, too many feet, no wagon though, just boot marks." Adaline poured coffee into a tin cup, handed it to Rosser without a word. "You see them?" Xavier asked. "No, just heard metal, chains maybe, could have been mules." "Could have been worse." Rosser drank deep, then nodded toward Adaline. "You're his wife," she hesitated. "Not yet." Rosser looked between them, then gave a slow nod. "Well, you've got good eyes, both of you." Xavier didn't speak, he didn't need to. Rosser stayed the night, curled near the fire with his saddle blanket. In the morning, Adaline packed him a cloth bundle of bread and dried meat. She didn't ask questions. After he left, Xavier checked the rifle, cleaned and reloaded it, then hung it back on the wall. Adaline watched from the threshold. "If someone does come," she said, "I won't hide." "You won't have to," he said. She stepped closer. "If they come for me, it won't be like before." He placed a hand on her waist, steady and sure. "No one's taking you from here." "I know that now," she said. "But it's different believing it in your bones." "You do," she nodded. "Every day more." That afternoon, she brought in a bundle of dried sage from the loft and hung it by the chimney. The scent filled the room slow and warm. Xavier watched her from the table, the way she moved with quiet purpose, not as a guest but as someone claiming ground. When she turned and caught him looking, she didn't glance away. "I'd like to marry you," she said plainly. He stood, walked to her, and took both her hands in his. "I wanted to ask," he said, "but I didn't want you to feel bound." "I've been bound before," she said. "This isn't that." He kissed her softly, reverent, his hands never tightening, just holding. Outside, snow whispered against the roof. Inside, two souls who had once been scattered had now found the shape of home. The wedding was held on a windless morning in late November. after the first hard freeze had settled deep into the soil. Xavier and Adaline stood beneath a bare cottonwood behind the cabin, its limbs stark against the pale sky. The preacher from town arrived bundled in an old wool coat, his breath fogging in the cold when he spoke the words that bound them. Rosser served as witness, boots crunching over the frozen earth, hat in hand the whole time. Adaline wore a dress she'd let down from the hem of an older one, dyed with walnut and stitched anew. She'd trimmed it with a bit of lace she'd found at the bottom of a wooden box in the loft. Xavier had shaved close and wore his father's vest, the buttons dulled from years of use. When the vows were spoken, they didn't kiss right away. They just looked at each other, both of them still, as if letting the moment settle deep. Then Xavier reached for her hand, and when she stepped closer, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers with quiet certainty. After they ate stew and rye bread by the fire, Rosser telling a story about trapping season gone wrong, and the preacher nodding along, hands wrapped around a mug of cider. When the sun fell behind the ridge, Xavier walked the guests to their horses, and Adaline stayed behind, taking down the crockery and wrapping the leftover bread in cloth. Later, standing in the doorway of their room, Xavier watched her smooth the quilt she'd finished just days before. She turned at the sound of his steps and held out her hand. "You ready to stop waiting?" she asked. "I already did," he said. She drew him in and they lay together beneath the weight of cloth she'd stitched with her own hands, her head tucked under his jaw, her fingers resting over his ribs. Their breaths found a rhythm, slow and in step, and the silence between them was full by winter's deep. The land had gone quiet under snow. The days passed in measured rhythms, feeding stock, boiling beans, mending harness. Adaline took to keeping notes in a ledger, marking stores and what they'd need come thaw. Xavier built a new gate for the pasture and sanded the splinters from the barn door. One afternoon, she brought out a book she'd found among his things, its cover faded and spine cracked. She sat beside him near the fire and opened it without speaking. Inside were pressed flowers, brittle and pale. She turned each page carefully, fingers steady. "Your mother's," he said. "I thought so," she replied. She didn't ask why he'd kept it, and he didn't offer. Some things were understood without being named. In the quiet that followed, she began to hum. A tune he didn't recognize, low and melodic. He closed his eyes and let the sound settle. When she stopped, he opened them again. "My mother used to sing that when she spun wool," she said. It helped her keep time. "Will you sing it again?" he asked. She did. In early March, when the snow cracked and pulled from the edges of the field, they walked the pasture and marked where they'd dig. She pointed to the slope near the creek. "Water will run better here," she said. "You sure it won't flood?" he asked. "We'll build a trench, angle it toward the cottonwood," he nodded. "You want onions there. Turnips first," she said. "Then onions, maybe beans." They worked side by side until the sun dipped low. When they returned to the cabin, her cheeks were flushed from wind, her eyes bright with tiredness. She leaned against the doorframe and looked out across the land. "This place fits me," she said. He stepped behind her, arms around her waist. "It fits us." She turned in his arms, face resting against his collar. "I never thought peace would feel like this." "It's not loud," he said. "No," she whispered, "but it's strong." That night she reached for his hand in sleep and he held it without waking fully. By April, green shoots pushed stubbornly through thawed earth. Adaline knelt beside the rows each morning, inspecting, adjusting, whispering to the soil like it might listen. Xavier built a trellis for beans, shaping the frame from willow he'd cut near the riverbank. One evening she brought out a scrap of cloth she'd been saving. She'd embroidered it with the shape of their land, the creek, the cottonwood, the garden rose. In the center, she'd stitched two joined hands. "I want to hang it in the cabin," she said. He took it in his hands, tracing the threads. "You made this for us," she nodded. "I wanted to give thanks." He hung it above the hearth, hammering the nail in slow and sure. That summer the garden flourished. By July they were pulling carrots and greens, drying herbs in the loft. Rosser rode in once a month, bringing news from town. He brought nails, thread, once a sack of sugar. "You two have made something good out here," he said, sipping coffee on the porch. "Not many can." Xavier glanced toward the field where Adaline was gathering seed pods in her apron. "She knows how to make things last." Rosser tipped his hat. "So do you?" That night they stood barefoot in the grass, watching lightning dance along the far hills. Adaline leaned into him, her arms wrapped around his back. "We've got enough," she said. He nodded. "We do." And they did. Enough shelter, enough food, enough quiet joy to fill the long days and carry them through lean times. They planted together, harvested together, mended, built, rested. They learned each other's silences, trusted each other's stillness. In the years that followed, the land remained steady beneath them. They added to the cabin slowly, a porch first, then a root cellar, then a room that caught the morning sun. They kept chickens, traded for a milk cow, planted apple trees that flowered in the fourth spring. They had a son, and then a daughter. Adaline taught them to read by firelight, to sew strong seams, to listen to the wind. Xavier taught them to ride, to carve, to watch the sky for signs of change. Their love never turned loud or showy. It lived in the way he always filled the kettle before she rose, in the way her eyes followed him when he saddled a horse, in the way their hands found each other in sleep. It was woven into the rhythm of the days, the turning of seasons, the soft breath shared between two people who had once been lost and now were entirely found. And so the house stood, warm through winter, open through summer. And Xavier and Adaline Ames lived out their years in the quiet, rooted joy of a life built together where nothing was hurried, and every moment was earned.